veterinarian, etc. And there were 7 or 8 of them, including his son, Luis Jr., who still signs himself at the, he's 40-something now, he still signs himself Luis El Estudiante Rodriguez, because he still considers his father El Maestro. But all of these are done, and there are now maybe 3 or 4 different groups. They called themselves El Grupo Bayate because the town of Mayo was originally called Bayate. It was settled by Swedes, probably from Minnesota.
Right. Right.
Yeah, who went there because they couldn't make it in the United States, and they had heard that Cuba offered something, and they came and they were the ones who built the sugar mills in Bayate. And the group Bayate, what they have done is to make real the history of their town. And in fact, they are celebrating, I think we have a lifeline fund that in part sends materials to the artists, any kind of materials they need. So he wrote and said, we're celebrating the birth of Bayate. I think, is it 100 years now? I think so, 100 years. And we're having, various activities. And would you like to contribute something as a prize from the center? For I said, okay, yeah, we'll contribute. What do you need? He said, well, we need these paints, we need this canvas, and it'll come as a package to the person who wins, whatever contest they're having, painting contest, and it will be from the center, which reminds me I have to write. We sent the materials down, but I didn't send my message.
The group of Swedes who colonized this city, there's some descendants in Minnesota, and they recently made a trip there.
Oh, did they?
And Marilyn she wrote something up. It's on our website.
Oh, good. I'll have to find it.
Yeah, maybe get her to come to the...
Yeah, the Cuban writer Jaime Saruski wrote a book about the founding of Bayate and everything. So, yeah, and they have put together models of the town at the time, what it was like, and I said, this is so absurd. Swedes in Cuba.
Yeah.
Maybe originally it was just as absurd to be a Swede in Minnesota.
Probably. I'm sure the Native Americans would agree with you.
Yes. So here, what we have here, these 2 walls are basically contemporary Cuban art. These 2 up here are again La Sky. Sandra Ramos is a very, very well-known printmaker who was in the Walker show as well. And one of her main subjects has to do with immigration. And she now lives between Florida and Cuba because one of the reasons she started doing art about immigration and the pain it caused to Cuban families to be split was that her own boyfriend left. And much of her art in those years had to do with the pain of her being left behind, his leaving. Anyway, on a recent, maybe it's been 3 years now, she went to Florida to show her art and met up with the boyfriend again, and now they are together again. This is Alicia Leal, as I mentioned before. This is one of the hottest young artists. This was we actually opened the center where we are now 10 years ago with her art when she was only 20 and 21. Now she's 31. And this is from a series called Abacus. Most of her work is too big to have brought to Minnesota. But you definitely have to look up Babel Paulette, and if you go to Cuba or if you go on one of our art trips, we'll definitely visit her. She has a beautiful studio in Havana, and she shows all over the world. And I remember when I took a group from the University of Massachusetts, art students, and we went to visit her, and she was talking about all of the art shows that she had done, and even traveling to places like Portugal and Korea while she was still a student. And the students kept saying, but how could you have a gallery show when you were still a student? And they could not comprehend anyone who was simply studying art would be given the opportunity to have a gallery show, not only in her own country, but abroad, and that she would be able to travel abroad, and so they were very impressed. This is a print of a work which Katie has the original of, a beautiful, it was part of a triptych, and I love it because it's called Cuban Landscape, and it's Mabel. In all of her glory, she's very beautiful. So these are Mabel's eyes, and these are the eyes of her then boyfriend, long gone.
Too bad for him.
Too bad for him. He came into the center about a year ago, Adonis, his name is Adonis.
Perfect.
And he was with a stepbrother that he had never met, who lived in New York, and who turned out also to be an artist. And he was so thrilled to walk into the Center for Cuban Studies and find some of his art, because when he was going with Mabel, we also bought his art. And he couldn't believe it. He said, "You have my art here." I said, "Don't you remember we bought it?" So he was able to show his stepbrother the kind of art he did.
What is the meaning of the abacus?
What?
The meaning of the abacus, is there a particular reason?
You mean why did she do a
You said
series
she had a
called
series.
Abacus?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know why she did it, but for example, the work that she used to apply to get into the Instituto Superior de Arte was a triptych of herself nude, back, front, and sideways, this high, her size, right? With all the number of the days and hours of her life. She's always been fascinated by time and numbers. She did a work which is in the collection of a friend of mine who teaches at Brandeis and Harvard and is currently buying art only to donate to the memory of a friend of his who died a couple of years ago and was Cuban, to build a collection of Cuban art in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And he bought a piece from Mabel which had her entire day in tiny photographs, plastic pieces, and commentary from 7 a.m. to midnight, everything that she did during. So I think she is simply fascinated by the minutes, the hours, the days, the weeks, the months that make up a person's life, and what you do with that time, how you treat it, how you multiply it, how you divide it, what's important. And she's very precise. And she's brought her mother in to help her brother, her father, even though he's divorced from her mother, he's in the theater. She's a very, very original artist, and someone definitely worth knowing. These are all the works of Jacqueline Brito, who taught for many years. She and her sister, Yamalis. We've got a number of Yamalis's prints here in different folders. And Jacqueline and her sister have been doing art together since they were in grade school. She has a big scrapbook when you go to visit her of articles about her and her sister when they were 10, 11, 12 years old in the Communist Party newspaper, Grandma, which was the only newspaper when they were growing up. Do you remember when people were putting sails on trucks and boats in order to escape from Cuba to the United States? So these two pieces were part of a series she did. And I asked her why she had put all these little pieces of glass on the cars. And she said that she did that very purposefully to indicate the fragility of the American dream that they all thought they were fleeing to, right? As you know, most of them didn't make it. But, just the idea that only a crazy Cuban would think you could put a sail on a car and float it to Florida. But, this is in no way is this an obviously political piece of art, and yet it's a commentary on something that is very political. And I think the Cubans' work was in a context of a revolution, both cultural and political. So of course, you can interpret a lot of the art politically, but not necessarily as dissident art. It is a comment on how they live. One of the reasons I like the self-taught art so much is that it is so obviously about how they live and what they think about. You know, it's very upfront. There's nothing hidden about it. You know, sometimes they're just talking about not having enough food. Sometimes they're talking about having too much craziness around them. Sometimes they're just talking about the beauty of the town in which they live. You know, and it's that kind of straightforwardness, which I think those of us who have gone to Cuba like very much about the Cubans. You know, you can really talk to them about anything. And I remember when we first started doing trips to Cuba, people would always say, well, do you have to be careful about what you say, or what, you know, what you ask, or are people going to be following us? I said, you don't have to be afraid at all, you know, and the main thing you have to recognize is that you can ask Cubans anything. They are not going to get angry, they are not going to be insulted, they are not going to think you're being unfair to them. You have to work really hard to make a Cuban be pissed off at you for asking a question, you know? So I think that when you go to Cuba, you have to keep that in mind. These works are done by Bernardo Navarro, who is a Cuban who works at the center and has lived in the United States for about 12 years. He married an American and lives in Brooklyn. And this is a wonderful collage made from items from before the revolution. For a long time, he was obsessed with Fidel in his art. And it was either negative or making fun of Fidel. And then he went back to Cuba for a visit about 3 or 4 years ago, and his ideas about Cuba changed completely. And he came back, and since he's been back, those two abstract works on the left of the far wall are his too. We have a number of beautiful works on rice paper in this, I think it's in this book right here, that he's been doing. We're moving to Brooklyn, so he started doing works on Brooklyn, but using some of the items from Cuba. Also, I mean, these are part of the libretta, the ration book. He stuck in, and I asked him why, and he said, well, we don't have a ration book, but everybody is on rationing in the United States. Wow, your politics is changing rapidly. This is Manuel Mendive, who's probably the best known Afro-Cuban artist, the artist who is most concerned. He is himself a Santero. He grew up in a Santeria family. He does absolutely fantastic sculpture, painting, drawing, and he lives a life of commitment to his spiritual beliefs and to Cuba. And when he was, these are actually from serigraphs from a calendar we did where Mendive did all the months. We don't have all the months anymore, but February is here in May, and I think there's one other, I can't remember which month. Of course, I kept November. But he is, one of the things he does to present his art is paint bodies of dancers, like his art, in the nude, and present a performance. One of the funniest things I remember is that I suddenly got a call from Mendive from Japan. And he said, I'm in Japan and I'm presenting my exhibit with a performance, and there is no body paint in the stores here. They only have two colors, black and white, for kabuki. And he said, could you please buy me some body paint? The curator from the gallery will fly to New York tomorrow
Jesus.
to pick up the paint. So I ran out and he said, these are the colors I need. I ran out, I got the body paint. The next night, about 6 o'clock, a little knock on the door. There's a Japanese man standing there. He bowed. He presented me with a box. It was a box of like rice cookies and stuff. It was really nice. I said, come in, you know. He sat down. He said, where are the paints? I said, here they are. He sat in the chair. He had a piece of paper. He picked up each paint jar, checked it off his list, said thank you very much, went downstairs to his waiting limo, flew back to the airport, flew back to Tokyo, and Mendive was able to paint the bodies in something other than black and white. And, you know, we had always hoped to do a performance with Mendive in this country. And we had a space in Chelsea on 23rd Street that had a huge stage and a big open window. Some of you have been there. We had to move from there 10 years ago. But I had always imagined, since I thought probably he couldn't, you know, paint naked bodies in the street or anything, that he could do it on that stage and everybody could look in. And I never would have imagined that he would not be able to do it in the United States. He did a performance at the Kennedy Center, and they would not let him paint the bodies. They made him put body suits on all the dancers, and he had to paint the body suits. And that was at the Kennedy Center. Then 2 years ago, he had a huge exhibit at the African Museum in Los Angeles. And I said, surely they will let him. No, we were visiting in 2016, just before that exhibit. My cousin and his wife were there. My sister, all the relatives were there. Mendive was painting a naked woman. And we said, why are you doing this? He said, because they won't let me do it in Los Angeles, so I'm painting the bodies and we're doing the performance and we're going to film it and then we're going to run it as a film in Los Angeles. And so that's what he was doing. He painted the naked woman. We watched him. She walked out. The bus driver was even there. And then the naked man came in, at which point the bus driver went, no! And fled. The rest of us were just as happy to watch him paint the naked man, but not the bus driver. It was too much for him. He went running. It was pretty funny. It was one of the things that we look back on that was most humorous in our trip. This is kind of all Cienfuegos artists. This is Nestor Vega. This is Camilo Villalvilla, who's been here in Minneapolis a few times. And this is Coperi, Luis Alberto Coperi, Adrian Rumbao. These are Camilo Villalvilla, and so is this one. They have a very strong artist community in Cienfuegos. And mostly due to the presence of one painter named Monte Bravo, who we have a few small pieces, all of these. This is Monte Bravo right here. And we have a number of other, all of these are Monte Bravo. He was a self-taught artist. He had taught geography in high school. And when things became really rough in the early 90s with the collapse of the Soviet Union, he decided to paint full-time. He had always painted as a child. And he quickly became the center of a group of artists, many of whom were trained, but he cared so much about building a community of artists in Cienfuegos and did so successfully that, for example, both Camilo and Coperi trained as architects. So they're not really self-taught artists, right? But they didn't study art, they studied architecture, and they worked as architects, and then said, why are we being architects? What we really love to do is draw. And so they both left architecture because also it was a time when there was really no hope of designing a house, for example, or anything individual. And so architecture wasn't much fun. You know, in a very poor country, you're not going to be able to design the kinds of things that you want to get built because there's no money to build them. so they found themselves doing sort of make-work architecture rather than creative architecture, and both of them turned to doing original art. And this was, we did a show of their two drawings several years ago, and we invited both of them to come, but the State Department only gave Koperi the visa, and it was his first visit ever outside of Cuba. And I swear to you, he was staying with friends in Brooklyn. Within 3 days, he knew the entire subway system and how to get around. I couldn't believe it. I said, I don't know how to get from Brooklyn to Manhattan and from Manhattan to Staten Island. And how do you do it? He said, well, I studied the maps. And within a month of their show, a private school in Massachusetts called and said, you know, our students have been studying drawing and we would really like to have a show of drawing, and we saw your show. Can we have the show after you? And we'd like to invite the two artists. I said, the two artists live in Cuba. Oh, that's no problem. I said, and I'm saying to myself, what kind of high school has no problem renting a show and bringing two artists from Cuba? And I looked it up, and of course it was a private school where it was $38,000 a year to go. It was in Dedham, Massachusetts. It was called Nobles in Greeno. And you know, so they, and again, they invited the two artists, but this time the State Department only gave the visa to Camilo. So at least each of them were able to come. I said, well, that was my introduction to the world of private high school.
Do they have workshops in San Fuego?
Oh, yes. Yeah, they do, absolutely. And Miguel Angel, the economist who runs the Maroya Gallery there, knows all of the artists, whether they're self-taught or academic artists in the whole area, and is, you know, has carried on Montebravo's work. Montebravo died in 2010. We were having a show of his work in September of 2009, and had invited him, and he was in the hospital, and then he died the following July. So it was a real loss. It was a real loss because he kind of kept that community so together, and they were, you know, a very committed group of people. And so, you know, there's still all those wonderful artists there, but I've noticed that as a unit, it hasn't been the same since Montebravo died. You know, we have a lot of art. You know, this is also one of Camilo's. I think it's terrific. And he also did the martí in the corner. Martí on martí. You have to look in all these bins. We've got so much. This is also, these are two of Camilo's drawings from the series Thesis, Antithesis, and States. And this is also one of the, I mean, one of the things that you learn about the Cuban artists, whether they are trained or not, but especially those who have been trained in any way, is what good draftsmen they are. They all know how to draw. They spend a lot of time learning how to draw. And so whatever they end up doing, they have a foundation of drawing that is so powerful that, and the other thing that I think is really important to know about Cuban artists is they can work in any medium. And you'll find that they're successful in many mediums. They'll work in photography, they'll work in ceramics, they'll work in cardboard, they'll work in paint, they'll work drawing. And in the 90s, when the usual materials were not available, you would find people working, you know, gathering up wood and metal from their neighborhoods, and that's when they started making things out of found materials. I mean, if you look at this wall, which is all self-taught artists, for example, these two works about Fidel by Carlos Cesar Ramon, who lives in Trinidad, this one, and also this one. I mean, he has made so many Fidels made of so many crazy materials. I mean, this is Fidel's beard made of old razors, right? This is an old pan, an old fork. I mean, he uses anything. well-known Cuban artist, completely changed his art in the 1990s by gathering up materials in the neighborhood. And there's a very good website that I would recommend to you. It's a website that's run by Havana Club Rum. And it's cultural, and they do long interviews with almost any artist you can imagine in Cuba. They have done so many good interviews. And I think you can read them, you can hear them, right, in Spanish, but you can read them in Spanish and English. So lets you choose, and they're excellent. They're excellent. They're in-depth.
What's the website?
I'm trying to remember the website, but I think it's called Havana Art. I'll find it when I finish, and I'll let you know. But it's paid for by Havana Club Rum. Okay. So here we have a small example of photography, and kind of a family, because Juan Moreda, who's married to Alicia Leal, the artist I mentioned, when he was 18 years old, he was hired by mostly American companies, but some Cuban companies, to paint billboards. And about 5 years ago, he found the negative. Afterwards, he would take pictures of the work he had painted. So he painted these 2 billboards, for example, and then he took a photograph. So he found the negatives 5 years ago. I mean, he's now in his mid-70s or late 70s, and he was 18 when he did these. But now he's not a photographer, he's a painter, but his wife and his daughter, this is his daughter, Cyrenaica Moreda, and these 2 are his daughter's work also. She's an installation artist and a painter and a photographer, does beautiful work. And he said, well, I'm going to make photographs of my old negatives, and they're absolutely wonderful. And some of them he added some other work to, but these are the pure photographs that he took at the time. And this is Juan Carlos Salom, who used to be married to Cyrenaica, and their daughter, this is their daughter's hand. It's a very, very, very beautiful piece of work. I have this in my own collection, printed on a piece of metal, really, a piece of aluminum. It's really great. And I have this one in my bedroom too. I really like it. This is one of the greatest painters, artists in Cuba, Roberto Fabello. This is a photograph was here that was sold or taken away, so we put Roberto Fabello here because it's very beautiful. Jerry found that in the last auction, what was the price that the Fabello sold for?
Oh, it was over 750,000.
Yeah. I said, God, we should change the price. This is only 3. These are photographs, a very famous one by Osvaldo Salas of Hemingway and Fidel. This was taken in 1960, and this was taken in 1959 by his son Roberto, who's still photographing. And this is one of Roberto's favorite photographs because the only light is the light from their lighting their cigars. That's all that lit that photograph. It's really terrific. And here we have some more contemporary art, and some more contemporary art by artists who are in Milwaukee. These are Tonel, Magdalena Campos, Tomas Essen, Tonel, Magdalena Campos, Sosa Bravo. Someone said this looks like Basquiat.
Yeah.
But before Basquiat. And this is again Sandra Ramos, a very early print. This was from, I think it was in the 1980s she did this. She's since produced it a number of times, but this was from the original. She did just 10 prints of it. And this is a film poster done by Alicia Leal. A little tiny Fuster. Another Fuster. Alejandro Lasso is a self-taught artist who works only in Afro-Cuban religion. And so these all have to do with Santeria or Abacoa. This is Eduardo Roca, known as Choco, who won the major, well, he was awarded the main artist prize that's given every year in Cuba, just 2 weeks ago.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
When I was in Cuba, we went to his.
You went to Choco Studio,
his
yeah.
studio, and I love his painting.
Oh, that's great. When were you there?
In 2014.
Yeah, yeah. So Choco was
He's a great
here.
guy.
Choco was here for the Harlem Havana
Yeah.
week in New York, and when he left with us the pieces that he brought with him. We had two other, this was one of them, we had two others that we sold the other day that were very beautiful. And this is one I've had for quite a while. I like it very much. But his prints are magnificent, I think. Yeah, really, he's great. I'm glad you went to see him. So I've talked too long. What time is it? Oh, great. I've cut it by a half hour today. Hooray! You have any questions? Any questions? Preguntas? Comentarios? Críticas?
So
Quejas?
when we were in Cuba, we were on a multicultural arts tour that we went under a license from you. You may know, what's her name? Anya Ackerberg.
Yes, sure.
So it was her trip that she.
Yeah, I told
she was
Anya,
on
why
it.
are you here for this show?
Yeah.
You should be here. She's somewhere in Boston.
And it was fabulous. And we went to a number of artist studios and co-ops. And we went to a cooperative in Santiago, and we went to a place in Havana, a neighborhood, Muralismo or something, a place where some artists had set up a cooperative and involved the community in making art and stuff. It just seems like it just flourishes.
That's great. Did you go to Paquitos, which is where he started the
No.
museum of barber chairs and peluquerias and.
But one of the things that I was struck with Choco and certainly other artists that we met is that, I mean, there really is now a market for their art. They make quite a lot of money.
Oh, they are without doubt the elite of Cuba.
Right.
Absolutely, because they can sell their art in hard currency. They are taxed, of course. And in fact, the artists were the first ones taxed. The new tax structure starting in the 90s, they started with the artists because the artists were the ones who could most easily sell their art in hard currency.
We went the first day. We went to the studio of William Perez and Marlise.
And Marlise,
Yeah, she
that's
was
Marlise up there.
That was fabulous.
Yeah. No, William always says I was the first American to buy a piece of his art. That was on our first art trip in 1995. We got to Cienfuegos, and I saw this big sort of partly three-dimensional drawing. I said, I have to have it, and that was William's. And that was, 22 years ago. Now he lives, of course, in Havana. Yeah, we always go to his studio.
And of course, in the Bay side, in the Fine Art Museum in Havana, they have plenty of art that depicts, I would say,
Well, it's critical art.
critical art.
Yeah.
As artists.
I know. I mean, the problem is that when that's shown here with the kind of propaganda that's attached to it, they make you think that, oh, this is secret art. It's not art you're going to see in Cuba.
Because they have
Yes,
censorship.
you are going to see it in Cuba.
That's exactly what you see right now.
Of course. I mean, there's someone like Jose Bedia, for example, who lives in Miami, but you can see his art all over the Museum of Fine Arts in Nevada.
Right.
Posters of the imagery of women leaders of the revolution, Celia Sanchez, and there's not very much of that.
No, there isn't very much, and in fact, Raul Martinez did a wonderful Celia Sanchez, for example, that we have in the center, but there haven't been very many at all, even though there are a number of women poster artists. Most of the poster art dedicated to women has come out of the Federation of Cuban Women, and for celebratory days and stuff. Now, there are individual artists like Judith Vidal Fife in Trinidad, who is a feminist. She started a whole project 3 years ago where she decided to do art dedicated to famous women historically of Trinidad, Cuba. And what she did, she decided to involve the embroidery community. As you know, Trinidad is known for its embroidery and its, all of the hand sewn arts. And what she did was she communicated with she got about 20 women in Trinidad who embroider and were known as master embroiderers to work with her on the art. And what she did was she would sketch in the famous woman she was dealing with the clothes of her era, whether it was 1900, 1800, 2000, whatever. And then she would give that sketch usually on linen to one of the embroiderers and say, embroider it as you want, and when you give it back to me, I will finish my part, the painting part, the drawing part. Amazing work, amazing, she's really incredible. And she's had a show in many places. She had a beautiful show in Havana recently with that art. And if you go to Trinidad, you have to visit her because she and her compañera, she's a little tiny white person and her lover is a very tall black woman. And they are the perfect couple, and they built this 3-story house together, and it houses all of Judith's art. And they are very concerned about precisely what you're asking about, that nobody pays attention to the famous women in this case, she did it with Trinidad. Judith, like Judith, but Y-U-D-I-T. Judith Vidal Fife. F-A-I-F-E. Yeah.
I also have a Corda photograph that is La Banderos, and it's the women in the Revolution carrying the flag, and it's just a fabulous
It's a wonderful
capture.
Well, and if you think of the photographs taken by Lee Lockwood of the women's militia at the beginning of the Revolution, there's a lot of photography dedicated to women. But in terms of the art, there are many, many women artists, but the poster are one of the, kind of myths about Cuban poster art is that there are no women poster artists. But in fact, there are a lot of women poster artists. It's just that their subject is usually not women. They instead do, whatever they want to do that isn't usually dedicated to a women's subject necessarily. And so, even if, when you think about someone like Elena Serrano, who was known most famously for her Che on Latin America poster, and she became one of the most famous women poster artists, but primarily because of that poster. Most people don't even know what other posters she's done, right?
I have a question. I was on the same tour.
Here you hold
and
this.
I had an interesting discussion with a young Afro-Cuban who part of his
Discussion is
crew
interesting.
was selling his work, and a lot of it was sort of cheap images of Che Guevara and different other things. And so I asked him if this was something that because he admired Che, and he said, well, no, this is because we have to produce for the market. A lot of us artists, and it's like artists in the United States, right? And so he says, what my passion
Was
is.
this on the street?
No, this was at this workshop, at this cooperative workshop
Oh,
in
I see.
Santiago.
Yes.
He had some
He does print.
that were much more sort of avant-garde, and he said, my passion is the environment. That's
Is
what
it what?
I'm concerned
The environment.
The environment. And global warming and climate change and what we're
Like
doing.
Lester Campa and Las Terrazas.
He said, but that doesn't sell, at least the way his vision and how he shows
Well, the
it.
tourist buy the chase though.
And so, he felt this conflict, this tug, and so he does enough of what will sell in order to make a living, so he can do what
He probably doesn't realize to Las Terrazas, and what they want are Lester Campa's environmental paintings and drawings. That's what they want. And every so often they'll see something that's just a woman who happens to be the woman who left him, got obsessed with drawing her for a while. Or Che Guevara or something, and you say, well, where are your environmental? So, it just
Anyway, I was wondering if you could just say a little bit about that conflict between how the sort of market steps that Cuba's made, how that has impacted.
Well, of course, the problem is there's no domestic market
Right.
for art in Cuba. So all of the market is turned toward foreigners. Little by little, they're beginning to form a domestic market, but basically there is none. And so, one of the things that we've tried to do is always get art that in some way says Cuba to me. See, I think there are so many well-known Cuban artists today who could not be identified as Cuban artists. They could come from New York or Paris or, they're fine artists and they're wonderful artists, but there's nothing in their art that says, I'm Cuban. And one of the reasons that I like the self-taught art, one of the reasons I like the art made from found materials, etc., is that to me it says Cuba. And I try to, the kinds of things that we buy for our permanent collection or that we get to sell in our shows have to say in some way that they're Cuban. I want them to be identified as Cubans. And I don't think that's necessarily true when it comes to museums buying art, or they simply a great painting. That's a great painting. Fine, I'll buy it. But if I see two great paintings and one says Cuba to me, even if it might not be quite as great as the other one, I'll get the one that in some way says Cuba, either from the material, the tradition, the history. It has to do with Santeria, maybe. It has to do with immigration. It has to do with something that's going on in Cuba. Because I think that's one of the ways people find out about a country is through its culture, through its art, through its literature, through its music.
So when you bring art here from Cuba, you purchase it and then sell
We
it?
purchase as much as we can. Usually the less expensive art, if something is under $1,000 and we have the money, I'll try to purchase it. If it's more than that, we'll take it on consignment. And we're lucky, because we were the ones who sued the U.S. Treasury Department and made it possible for people from the United States to bring in original Cuban art. The artists are quite grateful to us. And so we're able to bring in a lot of art on consignment that other galleries are not. They really have to buy it, or they have to have some kind of permanent arrangement as the representative of that particular artist, and we don't. So we have a tremendous advantage that way. And much of the art has been donated to us. I mean, just as an example, I wrote Sandra Levinson recently and said, we sold a painting today, we owe you $250. And she wrote back and said, you don't owe me a thing. And you don't owe me a thing for any of the other art you have on consignment, which is almost everything at the time. We had sold almost everything that we had purchased. And what we had were new things that were on consignment. And she said, nope, I want to donate all of it to the center because you're in trouble. So, just remember that every time you buy a Sandra Dooley, the money goes all to the center now because of her donation. A really wonderful person. Yeah. Any other questions?
How many people have you brought by Sandra Dooley's house over the last 5 or 10 years?
Oh, I don't know. I take almost every group there. And it's so interesting because people who say they have no interest in folk art, they're not interested in self-taught art, they only want Cacho or Roberto Diago or Zaida Del Rio or Tonel or Toya Rock or Mabel Poblet. They all buy something from Sandra Levinson. Yeah, everybody. You know, sometimes it's not for them. They say, I know my sister would love this. I know my niece would love this. My husband will love this. He doesn't like anything else I like. By the way, this artist here is one of the completely true outsider artists I've ever found in Cuba. Guayacón. He's from Cienfuegos. This is Guayacón himself. He's probably about 80 now. Almost everybody has his wrong birth date down because they put down when he was born in 41 or something. He was actually born in 31. I don't know. For some reason, he chose to tell me his true birth date. And he does just amazing work. At one point, he came up to me and said, I've painted 100 paper bags for you to take back to the center. I said, 100 paper bags? I can't afford that, and I don't have any room to carry them. No, he said, they're small. You'll see, and they were all lunch bags. We've got, in one of the portfolios here, we've got maybe 10 of the lunch bags. So we had 100, I think now we have 30. They're absolutely wonderful, you know? And if he was an outsider artist in one of the outsider art fairs in the United States, he'd be getting thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, you know? But those kinds of artists aren't known in this country. But you know, you go to the outsider art fair every January. When we were in the outsider art fair for the first time last year, we had to raise our prices because the person who ran the fair said, you know, we let you in the fair, but you have to have more expensive art to be in this fair. And, I mean, we didn't have the money to buy a booth. So one of our contributors gave us the $7,500 to have a small booth for that weekend. And he felt so good about the fact that we sold so much art and there were so many people always in our booth that he said that this year he would get us a larger booth. The only thing is we don't know if we'll be able to do it because we'll be here and then we'll be moving. So we'll see if we can actually do it. But Guayacón is fantastic. You know, he's really, really good.
Must be hard to function.
And of course, Sandra Dooley, and these are more Isabel de las Mercedes in color. Very rare. Any other questions, or am I liberated?
So are we gonna do a little travel thing?
Oh, yes, right, exactly. Let me get up there. I'll use the microphone for that.
So we've got a movie, so are you gonna talk about travel first and then the documentary, or do you wanna?
I think I'd better talk about the travel first.
Okay.
You know, if that's okay.